Welcome everyone to my channel. Please support me with a like and a subscription. I'll be delighting you with new stories every day. Thank you, and enjoy. Sometimes luxury isn't diamonds, cars, or vacations. Sometimes luxury is air. The kind you can breathe in deeply without fear of someone noticing you finally breathing. I realized this morning, sitting in the kitchen of our huge house, watching the sun cut the tiles into squares. Everything was perfect: the coffee, the silence, the view of the garden. And yet, it wasn't mine. My husband, Artyom, was in negotiations. He's always somewhere. Always in a suit, always on call, at the center of someone else's decisions. He says, "I'm doing all this for us." And I increasingly wonder, who is this we? My phone vibrated on the table. A message from a friend. "Katya, did you see the photo of your husband in Milan? I think he's with that model again." I didn't open the link. Not because I didn't want to see, because I already knew. For 6 months, I'd been living in this strange limbo, between knowledge and silence. And, oddly enough, it was the silence that saved me. Until he showed up. It all started in June. I arrived at the dacha, for the first time in a long time. Artyom inherited the house by the sea from his father, but he never went there. "Too quiet," he said. But I, on the contrary, wanted silence. The veranda smelled of pine and the sea. I was standing barefoot when I heard behind me, "Excuse me, are you perhaps Ekaterina?" I turned around. A man in his early 30s, wearing a faded shirt, with a tired but honest gaze. "I'm Ilya, Artyom's brother." Pause. "You didn't know I lived here?" I didn't know. My husband never mentioned my brother. He helped me carry my suitcase and offered me tea. We sat in the garden, drinking, and everything was strangely simple. He spoke little, but somehow correctly, without pressure, without falseness. I caught myself, for the first time in a long time, struggling with words. "Artyom told me you're on television now," Ilya said. "Told me?" I chuckled. "That's funny. He usually prefers not to talk about me at all." He looked at me intently. "Then tell me yourself." That evening, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time. I heard Ilya fixing something behind the wall, then soft music playing. Not romantic, real, rough, lively. I lay in the dark and thought how strange it felt to be next to someone you expect nothing from, but suddenly want to hear them breathe. The next morning, we went to the sea. He walked ahead, barefoot, the sand crunching under his feet. "You know, Katya," he said without turning around, "your husband said the sea irritates him." Of course, I smiled. It doesn't obey. And you? And I think I finally understand why I missed it. He turned. Our gazes met. And at that moment, a quietness filled my chest, like before a storm. We both knew it was wrong. But it was real. I left a week later, promising myself to forget. But memories are like salt, they stay on the skin, even if washed away with water. That same evening, Artyom called. "Katya, where are you?" "At the dacha." "You could have told me. I sent Ilya there." "Yes, I noticed." Silence. "I hope you're not tired of him and his philosophies?" "On the contrary. That's wonderful." His voice grew colder. "Just don't forget who you are and where you belong." I turned off my phone. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't cry. I simply went out onto the balcony and watched the sunset disappear into the sea. With each passing day, I realize more and more, maybe I've been living the wrong life my whole life. And now I am simply learning to be myself. I returned to Moscow feeling as if I'd left behind not just a suitcase, but a part of myself. The city greeted me with the familiar noise, traffic jams, and endless rhythm of a schedule I no longer fit into. Artyom was already home. He was sitting at his laptop in the office, talking to someone in English, pretending to be glad to see me back. Hi, I said. Ah, Katya. You're just in time. Dinner with my partners tomorrow. Stay close, okay? Of course. He didn't look up from the screen, but I smiled anyway. Habitually, like I'd done thousands of times. For a second, I thought of Ilya. The look in his eyes when he'd said, "You smile too often when you don't mean to." That evening, when Artyom left on business, I found an old wooden box on a shelf. Inside were photographs, him and me in the first years of our marriage, a house by the sea itself, smooth, endless. I stared at them for a long time, until I noticed I wasn't smiling at the faces in the photos, but at the memory of another person with whom I didn't have to be right. The next day, a letter arrived. Unsigned, unsubjected. You left a book by the sea. I didn't open it, but the bookmark remained on the page about forgiveness. I don't know if it was a coincidence. I reread the message several times. The address was from a familiar region. Ilya. She didn't respond right away, only in the evening, probably not a coincidence. Thank you. A minute later, a short reply. If it gets too noisy, come over. Everything is the same here. I stared at the screen for a long time, then turned off the phone. Not because I didn't want to go. Because I knew that if I left, there would be no turning back. Dinner with my partners went as expected. Talk of money, politics, toasts to success. I sat next to Artyom, and he held my hand as if we were each other's jewels. Not a couple, not a family, a display case. Katya, you look wonderful, said one of the guests. Artyom chuckled, my best investment. Everyone laughed. But I didn't. At that moment, something inside me snapped. Not loudly, like a thin thread. I didn't sleep that night. The city lights reflected in the window, my phone glowed on the nightstand. One click, and I would have texted him again. I'll be there. But I didn't. Bye. A week later, Artyom left for London. For how long? I asked. We'll see. The main thing is, don't be bored. When the door closed behind him, the apartment became strangely quiet. Not the kind of silence that's scary, but the kind where you can finally hear yourself. I took out my suitcase. The same one, from the seaside. It still smelled of salt. The platform was crowded. The train left in the evening. I bought a ticket at the last minute. I didn't tell anyone, not even my friend. Sometimes decisions come not from the mind, but from the breath. Inhale, exhale, step. He met me at the station. Just standing there, leaning against the car, wearing an old shirt, just like back then. No questions. No reproaches. Hello, I said. Hello. I didn't know if I'd come. But I knew. The house by the sea was the same. Old shutters, the scent of pine trees, the gentle sound of the surf. We sat on the veranda, drinking tea. He spoke little, and that was his strength. How are you? I asked. Simple. And you? Complicated. Then stay a little. I stayed. For a day. Then 3. Then I stopped counting. Everything between us happened without words. Without plans. Without promises. Just the feeling that here you could be yourself, without gloss, without roles. Sometimes in the evenings he would put on music, and we would just sit next to each other. Sometimes he would say, "You don't have to apologize for how you feel." And I would answer, "I'm not apologizing. I'm just afraid." That night the sea was especially loud. I stared at the horizon for a long time and thought that there are things that can't be brought back, but can be understood. And maybe that's enough. The next morning, I wrote my husband a short message. I need time. Don't look for me. I hit send and felt a strange relief. As if for the first time in a long time I'd done something not right, but honest. Ilya came out of the house and sat down next to me. So, you've decided everything? No. You've just stopped being afraid. He nodded. He was silent for a long time, then said quietly, Then maybe for the first time, you're truly one of us. I thought I'd stay for a day. But the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into a warm, drawn-out summer where time ceased to exist. Ilya lived simply. In the morning, he'd go to the workshop to build a boat, old but beautiful, out of oak planks. In the evening, he'd return with the smell of resin and the sea, bringing fresh fish, and lighting a fire in the yard. Sometimes he'd look at me as if he saw not a woman who'd escaped, but someone who'd finally stopped hiding. "This air suits you," he said once, throwing a branch into the fire. "Air? Yes. You breathe it as if for the first time." I smiled. I didn't answer. Because he was right. In the village, people notice everything quickly. A couple of days after my arrival, a neighbor, old Aunt Martha, brought strawberries and said, as if by chance, "You're so happy together." And I thought he'd never see it again. I didn't ask who exactly. I just nodded and thanked him. In the evenings we walked along the shore. He talked about his life, briefly, without making excuses. About his wife, whom he divorced 5 years ago. About his son, who lives in St. Petersburg. About how one day he simply got tired of other people's expectations. "You're tired too, aren't you?" he asked. "Me? From a life where everything is right." I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't lie. Yes. One day, after a particularly hot day, we went for a night swim. The sea was warm and calm, the stars low, almost touching the water. I laughed, like in my youth, when you don't think about who's watching what tomorrow will bring, who's waiting for the call. Ilya swam closer and said quietly, "You know, I didn't think I could do this again, just be. And I didn't think I could feel." He looked at me for a long time, without touching. And then he gently brushed a strand of hair from my face. His fingers smelled of salt and wood. It wasn't a kiss, a promise. Quiet, wordless. But every summer has its shadow. On the third day after that night, Artyom called. "Katya, where are you?" His voice was cold, emotionless. "She's gone." "I understand. But why am I hearing this from your lawyer?" I fell silent. And then calmly said, "Because I don't want to be a decoration anymore." There was a pause on the line. "You don't understand what you're doing." For the first time, I understand. I put the phone on the table and didn't pick it up again. Ilya didn't ask anything. He just came up to me, hugged me, and said quietly, "Sometimes to destroy is the only way to build anew." I buried my face in his shoulder, feeling something inside me unwind, like a breath I'd been holding for so long. We began to live as if outside the calendar. In the mornings, he made coffee, and I wrote long-forgotten texts, thoughts I'd been afraid to express. Sometimes he read my notes without asking permission and said, "Here you are. The real you." But the calmer it became outside, the louder the roar inside. I understood that all this wasn't forever. That there was life, bills, a past that wouldn't let go. And yet, I couldn't leave. I couldn't even think about it. Because here, I was finally alive. One evening it began to rain, a light, warm, sea-like rain. We stood on the veranda, listening to the drops hit the roof. Ilya said quietly, "You know, I'm not asking you to stay. Just be here while you can." I looked at him, at the sea outside the window, and replied, "And if I can't leave? Then it will be your choice." He stepped closer. And this time, nothing remained between us. No words, no fear, no distance. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. He stood by the window, looking out at the sea. The sun illuminated his profile, and I caught myself thinking that for the first time in many years, I felt no guilt. Only silence and ease. I knew things would be difficult ahead. That this whole story wasn't about escaping, but about returning to oneself. But for now, I simply lived. Without rules. No promises. With him. Sometimes I'd wake up at night and listen for a long time to the sea's breathing. It seemed alive, not calm, not kind, simply real. Like a person who promises nothing but the truth. Ilya slept next to me, and I looked at his hand lying on the sheet and thought that this simplicity was luxury. No masks, no roles. Just him, me, and sounds that don't exist in the city. But the past always finds its way back. That day, a black SUV appeared in the village. At first, I thought I was mistaken, there were no such cars here. And then I saw Artyom get out. He looked impeccable, as always, an expensive suit, confidence, a slight smile with which he knew how to devalue any conversation. I froze on the porch. The wind fluttered my dress, the sun beat down on my eyes, and everything that was happening seemed unreal. Found it, he said, stepping closer. Although you might as well not have looked. I didn't answer. You don't have to look at me like that, Katya. I'm not trying to persuade you. I just wanted to see what you've done to our lives. Ours? I chuckled. You've been living separately for a long time, you just didn't notice. He looked at me carefully. This man. He nodded toward the house. It's temporary, you understand, right? I took a breath to answer, but Ilya appeared in front of me. It's simple, a t-shirt, hands in his pockets, a calm that only angers those accustomed to control. Hi, he said to Artyom. Did something happen? It's a family matter, he replied coldly. Then maybe we should talk to our family? Ilya said calmly but reservedly, not raising his voice. At that moment, for the first time, I felt, here it is, the contrast. Two worlds. Two lives. Two different ways of existing. Artyom left half an hour later. He left only a short note, you'll change your mind. Everyone changes their mind. When his car disappeared around the corner, Ilya came up and silently hugged me. I didn't cry. I just stood there and felt his arms, the only thing holding me in place. That evening, he said, if you need to leave, I'll understand. I'm not leaving. Katya, you don't have to prove to yourself that you can confront the past. I'm not proving anything. I'm simply choosing. He nodded, but I could see something was troubling him inside. Perhaps it was the fear that all this wouldn't last. A couple of days later, people in the village started whispering. About a city woman, about how her husband will come and destroy everything. I listened and remained silent. There was no longer any desire to justify myself. Everything changed that evening when Ilya arrived later than usual. He looked tired, sat down on the steps, and said, we live strangely, don't we? Why? Because we're afraid to call a spade a spade. I sat down next to him. And if we call a spade, then maybe everything will become real. He looked at me, slowly, as if seeing me for the first time. And I realized that this was precisely what terrified me most, being seen completely. That night there were no words, no promises. Only breathing, warmth, and the quiet murmur of the sea, which had witnessed our choice. And in the morning, I woke up with a feeling like sand had settled in my chest, heavy but familiar. Sand between us, under our skin, in memory. It doesn't disappear, but it doesn't interfere with breathing either. That day, I received a letter. Unsigned. Just a short sentence, you destroyed everything we built. But perhaps this is the only way to start again. I didn't know if Artyom or someone who knew us both wrote it. But the meaning was true. Sometimes you have to destroy to understand what's truly yours. That evening we were sitting on the beach. Ilya held sand in his hands, running it through his fingers. You see, he said. It's impossible to hold on to someone if you don't let them go. I looked at him. And if you don't want to let go? Then hold on, not with your hands. With your heart. I smiled. And for the first time, I believed that maybe it wasn't all in vain. Silence comes in different forms. Sometimes it's soft, like a kitten's fur. Sometimes it's thick, tugging, like deep water. And sometimes it's too loud to hide. That's how it became between Ilya and me. Not because we had a fight. No. It's just that at some point it became clear, we need to not just live but decide. The village already knew everything. People stopped greeting each other. Some whispered, others simply looked at me as if I were a stranger who had ruined her marriage and come running here. Before, I wouldn't have been able to stand it. And now I just walked past. Let them talk, Ilya said. They're bored without other people's drama. But I knew it wasn't easy for him either. Every step here is on display. Every glance means something. One evening, as the sun was setting over the sea, he said, "You're not staying forever, are you?" I was silent. He didn't look at me, only ran his hand along the planks of the boat he'd been working on for the past few months. "Your life is there. Work, friends, apartment." "An apartment I haven't lived in for a long time," I answered quietly. He nodded. "But the world will still pull you back. It happens. And if I don't want to? Then maybe you'll succeed where I couldn't." That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. The rain pounded the roof, and it felt like someone was knocking, insistently, steadily. The phone blinked again. "You can still come back. No fuss. No fuss. I'll sort it all out." Artyom. He always spoke like someone used to making decisions for others. I stared at the message for a long time. And suddenly I realized I didn't feel anger. Only gratitude. He made me understand who I no longer wanted to be. I deleted the letter. The next morning, Ilya found me on the beach. I was standing knee-deep in water, looking at the horizon. "Are you thinking again?" he asked. "Yes." "About what?" "About how strange everything is. To find yourself, you have to lose everything else." He came closer and touched my shoulder. "Sometimes yes. Sometimes the opposite. You just have to stop being afraid of silence. But silence doesn't always bring peace." A week later, a letter arrived from the court, a divorce notice. Artyom didn't wait. It felt as if the door had closed forever. I sat on the porch with that piece of paper until the sun sank below the horizon. Ilya sat down next to me, silently took the envelope, tore it into tiny pieces, and tossed it into the wind. "I'm free now," he said. "Yes. And how do you feel?" "I don't know yet." He smiled. "Then wait. True feeling doesn't come right away." That night, I woke up to him quietly playing the guitar. The melody was simple, almost childish. I got up, walked over, and sat down next to him. "What is this?" "Old. I wrote it when I still thought everything could be fixed." "And can it?" He looked at me. "Sometimes. If you stop in time." I took his hand and ran my finger over his calluses. "Aren't you afraid of losing me again?" "I'm afraid. But to be afraid is to still be alive." He smiled, and that moment became almost surreal, as if the world had stopped, leaving us alone. In the morning, I started packing. Not because I wanted to leave, because I realized that if I stayed, everything would become a habit. And I didn't want him to become just another page. He walked in as I was putting my books in my bag. "Have you decided?" he asked calmly. "Yes." "When?" "Tomorrow." He nodded and came closer. "Then don't think about today. Just live today." That evening, we went out to the sea. The waves were strong, the wind took my breath away, but that didn't bother me. He held my hand, and every touch of his held more words than I could bear. "You know," he said quietly, "if you leave, I won't look for you." "I know. But if you want to come back, just come." Without explanation. I nodded. "And if you leave?" He chuckled. "Then you'll have somewhere to return to." As we were returning home, he stopped at the water's edge. "Katya," he said, "don't be afraid of silence. It's not your enemy. It's just a place where you can hear who you really are." I looked at him, then at the sea. The silence really was the loudest of all. And in it, there was no longer any fear. When I left, he didn't come out to see me off. He simply stood by the window, and I knew he was watching, even if I couldn't see. The sea roared, as if urging me on, go. I drove slowly, along the old highway, where dust rose in clouds and the scent of pine mingled with salt. Behind me, the summer that had changed everything. Ahead, a city where I would have to be different, or perhaps myself for the first time. Moscow greeted me with its familiar noise. The air was thick, as if it needed to be cut with a knife. I was in no hurry to go home, if this place could still be called that. When I opened the apartment door, a feeling of alien space washed over me. Too clean, too neat, too silent. An envelope lay on the table. Artyom's handwriting, impeccable, even, as if written with a ruler. Katya, I realized that not everything can be held. If you ever truly feel at peace, then you've made the right choice. No signature. No period. As if even he understood that this wasn't the end, just a different starting point. The first few days, I lived in slow motion. I'd wake up, drink coffee, look out the window. People were rushing, arguing, calling someone, everyone had their reasons. But I had only one: learning to slow down. I started working remotely, writing texts I'd previously been afraid to share. Not for anyone, not for approval, just to remember what my own voice sounded like. Sometimes I caught myself searching for his scent: salt, wood, smoke. Sometimes I'd reach for my phone, as if waiting for an unsubscribed email. But he didn't write, and neither did I. It was honest. We agreed to keep quiet until it became truly important. Almost 3 months passed before I went to the sea again. Not for him. Simply because I missed the me who lived there. The village had changed. New houses, new faces. But Ilya's house stood as before. The shutters were open. The boat by the wall was finished, polished to a shine. I knocked. There was no answer. Only the creaking of planks and the smell of the sea. Inside, everything was tidy, but not a single thing was out of place. There was a note on the table. If you've come back, it's not in vain. I went to get water, but I think you'll understand everything without words. I smiled. Yes, I understand. I went out onto the shore. The sea roared louder than before, but it didn't frighten me. I sat down on the sand, closed my eyes, and heard the same rhythm, the same breathing. Somewhere in the distance, a seagull cried out, and I suddenly realized clearly, even if he didn't return right now, he was still here. Not in the house. Not in his body. But in the way I no longer feared silence. As the sun sank toward the horizon, I stood up. The sand was warm, like a palm. And somewhere behind me, I heard a footstep. You finally came, he said. I turned around. He stood there, just like then, in his old shirt, slightly tanned, with the same calm gaze. And you knew I'd come back, I replied. Of course. Why? Because everyone has a place where the road ends. And life begins. I moved closer. He took my hand, simply, without pathos, as if he'd never let go. And in that moment I realized, everything that had happened, the pain, the fear, the loss, was not in vain. Because only through this can one reach the present. As evening fell, and the sea turned almost black, I said, what if everything collapses again? He smiled. Then we'll build it again. Together? How else? We stood in silence. The silence was loud again, but now it wasn't frightening. It simply reminded me that life isn't about who you lost. It's about who you met when you stopped being afraid to be yourself.